I'm Charles Long, and this is my show here at Tanya Binoctor Gallery in Los Angeles. The title of the show is Worklight. I found the title on the street on my way to the studio, riding my bike every day. I would pick up different pieces of garbage and bring them to the studio. And this was right at the beginning of the quarantine in March of 2020. This piece here that I'm standing next to is called The Oracle. I didn't know its title, I asked it and it told me. So it actually sort of set the vibe for the show. All of you in those early days remember the confusion and wondering like, how long is this gonna last and what happened, did the world just end? And that's how making this work was for me. I just was in a pod of one person, not seeing anybody, and I would go to the studio with these little bits of styrofoam packaging material and parts of some shelving that were in the dumpster out front of my studio, and I would put them together and slowly brush cement over it. This is a very hard kind of cement with a wax coating over it. And so in a way, it's a shell that contains so many things that I valued in my life, in my experience, and we're talking abstract spiritual things. It took 3 months to make. This piece here, which is called Worklight, Lightworker, is composed of a lot of things from dumpsters outside my studio, things I found on the street, a piece of plumbing, a mannequin arm that I had in my studio. The mannequin got kind of chopped up and made it into a lot of the pieces in the show. So she was sort of like my partner through COVID. She was my pod partner. Old sculpture models, pieces of TV knobs. Importantly, this piece of glass here was my grandmother's Venetian glass collection, and I had a lot of it, and I thought, well, I don't know what to do with it. And so they became part of every sculpture that I made going forward. There's a way in which the knobs function for me always as a thing coming off of something where one grabs onto the world. It's also sort of emerging from the world, how people emerge from the world. And so riding my bike to the studio, I would find like the tailpiece off of a car, another old piece of sculpture, something I made back in '93, and these knobs that I made by wiggling my finger into clay and casting the plaster negative space and then putting those on the sculpture. You can see there's like a cartoony element because as serious as all this is, I also know that, you know, it's just art. There's something about the lightness, and so even that title for the show, Worklight, it even suggests work, which is, in my sense, love, like how one transforms suffering into meaning. That's the work. And the light is both spirituality, but it's also lighten up. It's a big deal, but guess what? Don't make too big a deal out of it. So it's playing those tensions. During quarantine, I actually met a lot of really interesting people, and I met someone who took me to their shaman for my birthday, and I got to experience a medicine called 5-MeO-DMT. And I don't know if that's what made the show really explode for me or not, but I can't really separate it out. And though this body of work is cohesive, the next piece that I did was this pretty insane piece, and it kind of came to me while I was meditating. This piece is called Worklight Make, and if you look up here on this totem, which is also part of the piece, the light that's reflecting off of the surface of the other sculpture here, it creates a sigil, which is a magic symbol for the word make in this case. So there's an M, the A is probably the most legible, the K is always hard for me to find, and then the E is fairly legible. This first piece, I created the sentence by angling these mirrored plateaus very specifically, though they look chaotic. Each one is an optical instrument that is capturing light from above and reflecting it onto the other half of the sculpture into that pattern. And the pieces that are underneath all this cement, like once again, this is my grandmother's Venetian glass, and this is a part of another sculpture in the other room, a Worklight sculpture. These two tablets were actually part of styrofoam cooler from the dumpster. These were scraps from a metal place near me. They were throwing them out, and they were part of airplane landing gear. This piece is Worklight Hour, and the sigil here is very cosmic. It has, you can see there's the O, the R is leaning on its back, and the U is this big ellipse here, so O-U-R. And there's a lot of different iconography that just appeared. This dancing lady, which I welded and coated in plaster, and the knobs that I referred to, this is my grandmother's glass again. And this piece brought in also a lot of strange spiritual things. There's a chopped up Buddha in it. This is the Buddha's foot, and the Buddha's sash is in here. And then if you look down below, you can see this is the Buddha's nose and mouth, and the Buddha's eyes and nose, and the Buddha's brain. And this was a vise in my studio that I was building things on, and they just sort of got on here. Over here is the toad, the Bufo alvarius toad that lives in the Sonoran Desert, and that's where they first found 5-MeO-DMT from a gland that is right here behind the neck. And to describe what happens when you vaporize it and inhale it is you pretty much instantly, or at least my experience was, I went and became one with God. So I experienced oneness and completely alert. It wasn't like I was drunk or high or hallucinating. It was an awareness. I was aware that I was dead and I was love, and that all there is love. Something I was noticing about the show was that there was a fractal nature to it. There were artworks within the artworks, and that this artwork total was actually part of a larger artwork. What we'll find is when we look at the different words, it makes a sentence called "Make believe our exiles chosen," which was a phrase that occurred to me when I was meditating. It actually comes from a song, but it was an idea that I was like, okay, so how do we get through this isolation here? And it was to take what seems an imposition and a limitation and own it. Taking that phrase and sort of repeating it again and again in the sculptures by making each word of that sentence was a way of really living the practice of not allowing myself to offload my responsibility for how reality was showing up. This piece is Worklight Chosen. The sigil on the wall, there's the C and the H, the O, the S, the E, and the N. So that makes up the word chosen. And the form that it's coming off of was taken from a scan of a dog. I found the file online and bought it for $40, so it was a scan of a live dog. And I had it formed into two mirror image dogs. Dogs have been a great teacher of mine and will always be, and all pets will be, all animals will be. There's something about being able to see from a non-human perspective, to see oneself from their view. When I turn the dogs, the pattern breaks up and then recomposes once it gets back to its point of origin. You might think that that light is projected from a single source, but it's made up of this, and I think it's a great pleasure to sort of look at what looks chaotic and understand that it's actually a very specific thing. We don't know how our phones work. We don't know how most technology works. We just know that what it will do for us and how to work with it. I hide a lot of things in the pieces that are meaningful to me. They're not really essential to understand the pieces, but for instance, under the piece is my grandmother's ashtray, and in it are the ashes of my two great studio dogs, Omar and Rudy, and surrounded by their toys. This piece is called Azazel. It is after a painting I grew up with in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Art Museum by Roger Vanderbyden from 1460. A piece he made, this analogous version of it, using 2 pieces of styrofoam that were in the dumpster, big 4x8 sheets that were all broken up, and styrofoam packaging material, my grandmother's vase, and a piece of a palm tree. Making this piece was really about making something sacred, which was a very daring thing. I knew to do that, but to ask yourself, how do I do something sacred, is a great question. And the piece also started from a postcard I've been carrying around since my days of growing up out in Philly. The postcard is right here. So I've had this postcard on the studio wall for years, and it was time to give it up. This piece spells out the word exiles, so there's E's and X's and I's and L's. It started with a piece of styrofoam packaging material, but all these different kinds of things evolved out of it. Like there's almost like this animal head and these figures that I call monads, and there's genitalia, female and male human genitalia on the bottom of the shelf supports. At this point, the process in the studio was very magical and poetic. It was just evolving daily on its own, and I just did my best to get out of the way and make the work. To get to the last room in the exhibition, you have to walk through these sigils. This is the sigil for fear, blame and shame, and anger. And it's part of this meditation practice I do called Tonglen, a Tibetan practice where you take in darkness and you breathe out love and compassion and light. So again, that's sort of what the Worklight is. It's changing darkness into light. Seems like a good thing to do. The plastic I found one day, and it probably was part of some, I guess, industrial Worklight or something. But I took the plastic and I pushed it into clay and I cast the path that it made. And then when that path was solid in plaster, I pushed that through and that produced this. So in a way, this becomes an altar to the butterfly effect, how everything goes on repeating forever. Of course, it's happening right now in every way and your mind can't even fathom it, but we might want to pay homage to that effect. It's a beautiful experience for me, at least. Throughout the exhibition in the skylights, there are these sculptures. Again, they're monads, they're larger, and they actually are both lights and speakers. I collaborated with the composer John Hassel and his bandmates Rick Cox and Luke Schwartz, and they made a 30-minute piece that's called The Nothing of Rose Light, and it's a very beautiful composition made specifically for the work to be experienced in. The final piece in the exhibition is Worklight Believe. It has my body in it, chopped up, my manager's body, my grandmother's glass, different kinds of things, and it was on like a fire pit that spins, and when you turn it, the sigil covers the entire room, and that's the sigil for the word believe.